Welcome back to the channel. This is a More Better SN coming at you with a deck that is near and dear to my heart. I am a Goblin player. I've loved Goblins. Mon's Goblin Raiders was the first Magic card that ever was in my possession. And even though that's just a vanilla 1/1 for 1, I loved it. I loved the art on it. I just love everything about Goblins. And as soon as more Goblins started coming out in the set, I just started building Goblin decks. And this is the current Goblin deck that I own in paper. I think that this is the best version of the Goblin decks. There are a lot of different versions out there and a lot of different combinations, but I believe that this is the best one by far. And I'm going to explain that to you guys of why this is better than other decks. This is a $165 deck. There are certain things you could take out of it to make it a little cheaper, but in terms of historic, this is an awesome deck for the money. It's going to get the job done. It's super powerful. It's super fast. It's overwhelming. You're going to flood the board with so many tokens, and you're going to have super powerful goblins that all synergize with each other. You don't need removal. You don't need enchantments. You don't need anything. You just need to flood the board with goblins and then turn them sideways and win. And I'm going to show you just exactly how to do that. As you can see over here, the rarity count, like I was saying before, even if you wanted to build this deck on Arena, you're not going to be spending any mythics at all on this. Just a bunch of rares and some commons and uncommons. That's about it. And this deck will climb the ladder. It's time and time again one of the most powerful historic decks on the meta. And I don't see it going anywhere, especially with some of the new cards that have been printed. But let's go through the deck real quick, and I'll explain the deck to you. So starting off at number 1, this is a card that nobody uses, but I don't understand why. It's Legion Loyalist. It is a 1/1 for 1 with haste, but that's not the reason why we're putting that in here. Obviously, haste is nice. You can get 1 damage off on your first turn, but the battalion ability underneath it is what we're doing, what we're putting this in the deck for. Whenever Legion Loyalist and at least 2 other creatures attack, which is going to be very easy for you to do, especially with a deck like this, creatures you control gain first strike and trample until end of turn and can't be blocked by creature tokens. So with all the creature tokens that are going on with, like, especially if you're using this in historic with all the elves create a lot of creature tokens, and those creature tokens will be ineffective in trying to stop your big strike in attacking. Now, the real reason it's in here is the first strike and trample. First strike and trample is a great combination, especially when you're swinging in with decently sized bodies because of the lords that we have in this deck. And just when you have that many creatures, just the first strike, you're going to be trading, but you're going to be coming out the other end with your guys on top 90% of the time. This is a phenomenal card for 1 mana. It is a game-winning card for 1 mana. And I don't know why more people don't use it, but it's definitely a card that you should include in your Goblin list. The next most important card in the list is another 1-drop. It is Skirk Prospector. This is a 1/1 for 1, and it has the ability to sacrifice a goblin, add 1 mana. So you can sacrifice anything you want. You could, whatever goblins that are on the battlefield. But if they have an ETB effect, after they've done their ETB effect and they're just a 1/1 sitting there, they're just as good as a goblin token. So sacrifice it, get the mana, and eventually with all the things that give haste, and with the Runesvelt Horde Master giving you cards in exile to keep casting, you almost have unlimited mana. I've gotten to points where my turn was lasting almost 10 minutes. And the other guy that I was playing against was just like, I just want to see how this plays out, because this is one of the craziest things I've ever seen in Magic. And he didn't concede, didn't scoop, nothing of that. He just was like, I'm in. I want to see how this plays out. I want to see how much possible damage that you could be doing at the end of this gigantic process of whatever you're doing here with sacking goblins and creating mana and casting new goblins. So this is definitely a super important card for this deck. Without this card, this deck is definitely not as powerful by far. Next up, we have our first Lord. This is the Runesvelt Horde Master. This was printed in Dominaria United. This card's great. This is like, we're talking about the top 3 most important cards in the deck in the first 3 cards. The lowest mana values in the entire deck. This gives you +1/+1 to all other goblins, and then the best ability of all is the one underneath it, that whenever this creature or another goblin you control dies, doesn't matter if it's through combat or a spell or sacrifice, just as long as it dies, you get to exile the top cards of your library, and if that card is a goblin creature, then you can cast it until the end of your next turn. Not even this turn, the next turn. So it just makes your hand like you're drawing cards like crazy. So throw one of these on the battlefield, and if you have 2, that's it. But you also just have to watch about how many things you sacrifice, because you could mill yourself out. But this card, definitely the best Goblin Lord ever printed. All right, next up, we got the Wily Goblin. This is a Goblin Pirate. It's a 2 red for 1/1, and it's very basic. ETB, when it ETBs, you create a treasure token, and that's just a ramp for very early on in the game. You're going to be combining that with some discounting of the creature spells, and we're just trying to get to our top end stuff very quickly, and this is definitely one thing that gets us there. And it also acts as a sacrifice piece, because after it comes in and creates the treasure token, it's just a 1/1, so it's definitely available to be sacrificed for mana and for those Horde Master triggers. Next up is a new card from Foundation's Sear Slicer Goblin. I am a big fan of this card. This is a 2 mana 2/1, and it has no abilities other than this raid ability that says at the beginning of your end step, if you attack this turn, you create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. So a lot of people in this slot will put Goblin Instigator, which is a 1/1 for 2 mana that when it ETBs, it creates another 1/1. But I like the value on this card way better. The other one, once you cast it, it's dead. This one, it's the same amount of mana, and all you have to do is just attack with anything. You could attack with your Wily Goblin just so that, you know, it doesn't matter. And if they think it's a trick and they let it through, and then you get to create another goblin on top of that. But otherwise, the reoccurring value of this card over a Goblin Instigator is way better in my opinion, because this can just get lost on your battlefield, and people are going to be targeting other things like your Horde Master or your Loyalist or the other cards that we're going to be getting into. And they're just going to forget about this. And then every turn, you're just going to be pumping out token after token after token. And if you have multiple of these on the battlefield, and you already have a Goblin token on the battlefield, you just swing with that. They're going to block it. It'll die. Who cares? Triggers your Horde Master. And then it's also going to trigger all these goblins at the end of the turn. So you're going to be in a net profit at the end with having more tokens than you did before. So, you know, I've had this Goblin deck for a very long time. It's been a very long time since I added a card from a new set, because the goblins that have been coming out haven't been that great and don't fit this kind of Goblin deck. But this one is for sure a must-add. All right, next up we have Goblin Matron. This is a 3 mana 1/1. And normally you'd think 3 mana 1/1, that sucks. I don't want to put that in my deck. That doesn't sound too efficient. But when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a Goblin card, and if you do, reveal that card, put it in your hand, and shuffle your library afterward. So this is a tutor for any Goblin card, and our entire deck is Goblins. So you can literally, for 3 mana, grab any card you want and put it in your hand. You obviously have to reveal it. So, you know, if you're playing someone who has counter spells, you're going to have to wait till they tap out to do so. But you can go grab your Krenko. You can go grab your Muxus. You can go grab something that enables haste. You know, anything that you need, you know, a Legion Loyalist even, if you're ready to swing and end the game. You can go grab one of those if you haven't drawn it yet. This card is a great tutor card for Goblins and is another must-add. All right, next up we have Pashalik Mons, our first legendary goblin. This is a 3-mana 2/2 that says whenever this creature or another goblin dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. So remember I was saying before with all of the Skirk Prospector, when we have a bunch of tokens on the battlefield and we're going to be sacking them to create mana? Now, if you have one of these on the battlefield, it has another mode. So you're going to be sacking a creature. It's going to be creating 1 red mana for you. And it's also going to be doing 1 damage to any target, whether that be clearing out some creatures to attack, or if you're going straight to the face, it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. And then there's another ability there at the bottom that you can sacrifice a goblin for 4 mana and create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, which not that great, but in a pinch, if you really needed to do so because you needed more blockers or you needed to do that extra little ping of damage and you don't have a Skirk Prospector on the battlefield, then you could use it, but it's not going to come into play that often. The first ability is really what we're looking at here, just because you're going to create a ton of tokens with Krenko, and then you can just sack them all and end the game that way. You don't even need to swing. So it just gives you other options on a win condition. After that, we have the Goblin War Chief. This is our discounter and our haste enabler, all in one card. So for 3 mana, 2/2, and it says goblin spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and goblins you control have haste. This is an all-in-one amazing card for this deck. It's going to make your top end cheaper. It's going to make your low end cheaper so that you can just throw out as many spells as you can and flood the board, which is our main goal of what we really want to do, is just flood the board and go wide. And it gives all your goblins haste. So, gets out in the battlefield, immediately tap Krenko and create a bunch of tokens, and then all those tokens have haste, and you can just swing in with all of them. So this is kind of like a Lord, but it doesn't pump anybody, but it makes everything cheaper and gives them haste. This is a great goblin. Next up is Goblin Chieftain. It's just like the War Chief, just one other difference. It gives your goblins +1/+1 and haste. The other one gives you haste and makes them discounted. So this is kind of like the other side of the coin. It's one of the other good lords for this deck. 3 mana for a 2/2, just like the War Chief, and it already comes in with haste, and other goblins have haste. And this is a lord. We have 2 lords in this deck, and I don't think we need much more than that, especially because none of them are legendary, so you can throw as many of them out in the battlefield as you want. Next up, one of our big boys. This is one of our top end guys. We have 2 of them. We have 4 copies of Krenko Mob Boss. Everyone knows who Krenko is. This is the 4 mana 3/3 legendary goblin that has just 1 ability, and that's all he needs. You tap him and create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control, which is broken and crazy, and they just reprinted it, and I love it because I love goblins, and if that means goblins are making a comeback and Krenko is part of that, I'm on board 100%. And it's also a target for your goblin matron to go grab in case you need it and you haven't drawn one yet. And our big boy, Muxus Goblin Grandee. Now, this is pretty much a game ender. So that wily goblin is very important because you can create that treasure token, and then you really want your curve to be Skirk Prospector on 1, wily goblin on 2, Goblin War Chief on 3. Because then you're going to be discounted 1, so this will cost 5. And then you're going to have, hopefully by then, you're going to have, on turn 4, you're going to have 4 mana. And then you can use that treasure token, and then you can just cast this on turn 4. From the discount and from the treasure token. So having a turn 4 Muxus is huge. And if you can get it even before then, even better. But Muxus is a 4/4 legendary goblin for 6 mana. But you'll hopefully never have to cast it for 6. And it says, it's a lot of text on this card. When Muxus enters the battlefield, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. And then you get to put all goblin creature cards with converted mana cost 5 or less, so not another Muxus, but any other creature in our entire deck, onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then if you don't have them yet, and you can get some haste enablers like the Chieftain or War Chief out on the battlefield from that one of those pulls, that's huge. Like, because you want to attack with Muxus right away, just because of the next line of text on this card. Whenever Muxus attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other goblin you control. So if you looked at the top six of your cards in your library, and then you put let's say four into play. So that's 4. Muxus is 5. War Chief is 6. Wily Goblin is 7. Skirk Prospector is 8. So now you got a 12/12 attacking right away on turn 4. And this is one of the big reasons why I put the Legion Loyalist in the deck, and I don't know why no one else has, because every time I've played with this deck, I've had this deck for a very long time, and every time I have this deck out and I get Muxus out and I attack, obviously they're going to chump Muxus. They chump Muxus with some little 1/1 token or some little tiny creature that's not going to do anything, and then your 12/12's wasted. But if you have the Legion Loyalist out in the battlefield, or you got the Legion Loyalist out with part of Muxus's abilities, now you have a 12/12 first strike trample among all the other creatures that you have attacking, which are also first strike and trample. So now you can see why the Legion Loyalist was a must add to this deck, and I, again, don't know why no other players use this. If you know why other players do not put this in their Goblin decks, I'm talking to all the Goblin players out there, or just anybody who has an opinion on this, please leave a comment down below as to why this card is not in every single Goblin deck, and I would love to know why. So those are the creatures. Let's jump to the mana base. Average converted mana cost is 2.75. That's just probably because 4 copies of Muxus. But, you know, with the War Chiefs in there, they're going to be cheaper. And with the amount of Goblin tokens and things that we can sacrifice to get up to 6 mana, if we have to cast it at full cost, is very easy. So we're definitely not running 25 lands, like the recommended amount right here. We're going to be running 20. We're going to be running 18 mountains, 1 Den of the Bugbear, which enters tapped if you control 2 or more other lands. So you're going to kind of hope you get that in your opening hand. And later on in the game, if you're really strapped for a creature, or you think you can win with this extra little boost, you spend 4 mana, and then this land becomes a 3/2 red goblin creature, and it does exactly what Squee does. And whenever it attacks, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking. It's still a land. So it just adds another level of strategy and another threat to the board when, you know, you have countless threats you don't really need the Den of the Bugbear, but it's nice to have. Then we have 18 mountains, and then a new card from Bloomburrow that I pulled in a pack that I immediately threw in this deck. It used to just be all mountains in the Den of the Bugbear, and now we got a 3-tree city in there. This is a legendary land. That's why we only have 1 copy. I don't want to run into a point where I have a dead card in my hand, especially in a deck like this. So if I get it, cool. If I don't, no big deal, because this deck will run without it. This way I don't have to sack as many Goblin tokens. But as this land enters, choose a creature type. You pay 2 and tap it, and you choose a color, which we'll choose red. Add an amount of mana equal to the number of creatures you control of the chosen type. So instead of having to sack them, I can just tap 2 and tap this, and then I have the same amount of mana as if I sacked all those creatures. So you bring in a Krenko, you tap them, you create 5 Goblin tokens, and then you pay 2 and tap this. Now you have 5 plus all the other goblins that you own, which would be 6 would be Krenko, even more on top of that. You're going to probably have like 10 mana just off of 1 land. And you paid 2 and then tap this. So you paid 3 mana for 10 mana. So you're going to be able to empty your hand. You're going to be able to do a lot of crazy things with this deck. This deck is crazy. It goes off. When you think it's down and out, it's never out. This deck can turn a corner in an instant. I love this deck. I love goblins. I'm gonna stop right there because otherwise I'm just gonna keep talking about and gushing about goblins all day. But shout out to Jim Davis. Jim Davis is the other goblin. He is the Goblin King. But I love Mog Monday because I love seeing goblins. I'm pissed that he got rid of it. But if you like content like this, if you like this deck, like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment down below on any goblins that you would add to your list that are different from mine. I know that there are a million goblins out there. So this is just my combination of goblins that I like in my deck. If you have anything different, let me know. I'm More Better SN, and I'll catch you next time with another deck tech.